Hello, my name is Kyle, and today we're going to be talking about the basics of calculation in chess and how that works. So let's get started. Alrighty, so calculation in chess is essentially the idea that you're thinking ahead about what's going to happen in the future. It's a really important concept in chess. It's probably the core skill in chess, since in chess you're able to see everything, right? It's a perfect information game. You have perfect information about everything that's going on. Nothing's hidden to you. Nothing's unclear that, you're going to roll a die or something and then see a result. You know exactly what's going to happen if you make a move. So, because of that, calculation becomes really important. If you calculate incorrectly, then you have failed to gain information that you could have gained, right? You could have made this move with the knowledge that it would be bad and then instead not made it. Or you could have made a brilliant move because you knew that it was good, right? Well, if you didn't calculate ahead, you might not know it's a good idea and you might not play it. So calculation is really important to find good moves and also to realize that your moves might be bad and to not play them. Anywho, we'll get started with how this works. So we have a simple position here. Each side has 3 pawns and each side has a king. In this sort of situation, it looks like maybe it's just equal, it's a draw, nobody's really winning. But in fact, if we calculate, we can find the way that white will win the game. And this, end game here, this is a very simple one, and so it's very easy to just calculate everything. More complicated positions, you're not able to calculate everything, but you're able to calculate the important stuff. So we'll talk about that in a second. But here we're just going to look at every move, right? If we look at any of the moves of the king, we can tell that they're not really that helpful, right? Because if we go backwards, we see that our opponent could go forwards, right? We're just calculating one move ahead here and then evaluating and saying, that doesn't look good. If I'm running away and he's chasing me, or if he's running towards my pawns, that doesn't seem good. So that's the other thing, is you calculate ahead and then you evaluate the position you get to. So you have to try and visualize the position and say, is this good? Is this bad? Now, if we've looked at all the king moves, then we start looking at the pawn moves. And then it becomes pretty simple. There's only 3 moves, 1, 2, and 3, right? Each pawn can move up. Well, one thing we might realize pretty quickly is that these are identical, right? Let's say we play c6 and our opponent takes it. Well, we have 2 options, right? We could take back or we could push. If we don't do one of those things, we could play something else, but we'll quickly realize those aren't good. For example, if we play c6, they take. Let's say we play a6, well, now they'll take on d5, and it looks like we're losing, right? They're just going to get across. Even if we catch them, we're definitely not winning because we're down 2 pawns now. Probably the most reasonable move is to take, right? And that's usually what you want to do when you're calculating, is look for the most reasonable idea first. So let's say we take. Well, if we take now, maybe they'll play something like a6, and now our pawns can't move. And if we move towards them, well, we already realized earlier that the king can't really make any progress on his own, since the enemy king will just follow us. So, okay, now we look at something else, right? We look at b6. This is different, of course, right? Not quite the same. Well, they have 2, or you could say 4 options here, main options, right? They also have king moves, but if they move their king somewhere, we could just take this and get across. Easy calculations, right? And that's the thing, is sometimes we want to make these easy calculations just in case, right? Okay, let's say they take here. Well, if we're looking at all of our options, we have 2 captures and 2 pushes. And what we might realize here, after calculating a few things, is one of these moves here is actually really good for us. Okay, so if you've gone ahead and taken a look at this and calculate all the options, you may find that the best move actually, when looking at all the possibilities, keeping an open mind about them, actually the best move is c6. What if they take here? Well, what would we do here? We would take on b7. And now, oh, okay, we're getting across, right? If we go back, what if they take here? Well, now if we're calculating, we see we have 2 options and a6 is the winner. And this is going to win, by the way, because we're going to make a queen much faster than our opponent. So it's important to have a passed pawn and make a queen more than it is to have more pawns, right? So, when we're calculating like this, we could be sitting in this position calculating, saying, okay, I'm going to play b6. Okay, what if they take here? Okay, I'll play c6. Ah, and if they take, I can play a6. Aha. And now this pawn is going to get across, right? So that's what we want to be doing. We want to be doing that at the very beginning and trying to do it all in your head. For demonstration purposes, I went ahead and put it on the board. But in a real game, you're not going to be able to move the pieces, right? So here we have a very famous game and a very famous tactic here. So tactics are forcing moves and forcing ideas, and they require calculation to play correctly, right? If you don't calculate, you're just gonna, be guessing. So we want to look at our forcing ideas first when we're calculating. Here I wrote a little note, white to play and checkmate in 3 moves. So let's go ahead and take a moment here and kind of think of what's the most forcing thing I can do in this position, right? Even if it looks ridiculous, we should still calculate it. Okay, so if you were looking at this position, I'm hoping that you're listening to my advice and you calculated the move queen d8. It's maybe not obvious at first, right? Well, I'm just giving up my queen. But we want to look at every move, even if it looks ridiculous. If it's a forcing move and it's very easy to calculate, we should do it. It's just efficient to calculate these very forcing moves, right? There's only one response. King takes is the only thing they can do. And this is how players find these really shocking, sacrifices, and they give up their queen and then they win the game, right? Well, it's because they calculated ahead. They're not worried, they're not afraid, because they sat there and they calculated and said, I know this will result in a checkmate. So after the king takes, well, the idea you have to find is another very forcing move. Bishop to g5 check. So let's put that on the board and let's kind of see this position. Queen d8, king takes, only legal move. Bishop g5 check. And, we're looking at only checks here because checks are very forcing. And in this position, we have actually a double check. So both the rook and the bishop are attacking the king at the same time. So this is what's known as a double check. And specifically, the rook giving check is what's known as a discover check. These are all tactics that we're going to be implementing with our calculation. So our opponent only has 2 responses. The first response would be the move king e8. And, well, after king e8, what would we play here if we wanted to checkmate our opponent? Okay, so if you took a moment to look at this, right, you might notice that the winning move is actually rook to d8, checkmate. Game over, right? Well, that's not all our opponent can do. Sometimes our opponent has more than one option, and we want to make sure we calculate all of our opponent's options, because if we only calculate one, what if their other option's good, right? And then they play that one. Well, I used to do this all the time when I was starting out with chess. I would calculate one thing, I would say, ooh, if they do this, I'm gonna win. But the problem is, my opponent would play something else and I would lose. I would not get a good position. So you want to be careful. You want to make sure you're thorough in your calculations and you calculate everything that's possible. So the other possibility, of course, is king to c7. Well, maybe this move just wins. Maybe this move is fine, and now black is ahead a queen, and why are we so bad at chess, right? We'll have to go back to the drawing board. But in fact, no, we calculated, right? Hopefully. So what move would we play here? I'll go ahead and show you. It's the move bishop to d8 checkmate, right? So the fun thing about this is we cut across here and we're defended by the rook. And that's just game over. So we want to be making sure that we see this, because if we didn't see this at the beginning of our calculations, that's a big problem, right? A lot of players will try and solve positions on puzzles by just guessing at one move at a time. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we saw the whole sequence from start to finish and we knew that we were winning. You're not always able to do that in a practical game. Sometimes you calculate as far as you can go and then you say, I don't know what's happening after this. And then you have to evaluate. You say, well, okay, as far as I can see, this position looks like it's winning. It looks like I have an attack. It looks good. So, okay, I'll play it. But we want to try and push ourselves as far as we can go before making a committed decision. So calculation is the most important skill in chess, and it's really the thing that separates bad players from good players, especially early on. That's going to instantly propel you forward. There's things like strategy, there's things like knowing openings and endgames and all that, But all of that is secondary to just this core skill of calculation. Okay, and then finally, I want to show you a position here, which is a bit more complicated. It's actually black to play and checkmate in 5 moves. So in this position, the player playing as black here took his time and looked for forcing moves. He realized that, there's some forcing moves in this position. Maybe I should calculate them and see if I can find something. And he actually found a way to checkmate white very early on in the game. It's only 23 moves in. So if you want to pause the video and see if you can solve this, feel free. I will go ahead and show you the answer now. So if you want to take more time, you can, but here it is. The moves are bishop takes g2 check. Very forcing, only one response to take. So that's why we got to start with our very forcing moves. They're not always good, but when they are, that's it. There's nothing else he can do. It's good. So we have to look at this move, right? Queen h3 check. King takes. There is another option, right? King to h1, in which case g2 is checkmate. So hopefully you found that. King takes. Again, another very forcing move. Knight g5 check. Okay, the knights are working as a team and there's nowhere to go but g2. Knight to h4 check. Again, because the pawn is controlling territory and so are the knights, well, the king's got to go back to h1 again, and now we play g2, checkmate. So if you calculate it and if you're looking for your forcing moves, it could sometimes even seem easy, but the thing is, it's not obvious when you start out, right? You need to definitely train your way of thinking and get yourself to think in this manner where you say, I'm thinking about forcing moves first and foremost, and I'm going to calculate them. That's going to instantly get you past the first few hundred rating points, right? You have your ELO rating. If you're a very, very beginner player, you might be 400 ELO or even less, right? But you can very quickly jump past that just by looking at your tactics here and your calculation skills and saying, wait, let me just calculate my forcing moves. Let me always be looking out for those forcing moves. So that's all I have for you today. If you'd like to go back and watch anything, maybe there's something that was not so clear at first, go ahead and rewind, rewatch that. And if you'd like to dive deeper into chess, feel free to hop into a live lesson. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.